Hi and welcome. I'm Lisa. Thanks for joining me on the Whimsy Stamps YouTube channel. I am so excited to be sharing that Whimsy Stamps is now carrying their own line of Slimline embossing folders. I'm going to share a few tips and techniques with you today using the new folders. Embossing folders are a great way to add texture and dimension to your projects. I'm going to be demonstrating with the Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine during this video. You will need to know what sandwich works best for the type of machine you're going to be using. I recommend you check your owner's manual or you do a quick Google search for that information. I'm going to be sharing also a technique that doesn't require you to run this through the machine at all. So let's get started with a quick look at the two new embossing folders. On the left, I have wavelengths, and on the right, I have thatched. Now the folders measure approximately 3 3/4 inches wide by 8 5/8 of an inch high, and the embossed design is 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches. I'm going to place this cardstock in the folder and go ahead and crank it through the machine. You're going to notice that I do have a shim down. So I found that I do need to shim the folder to get the best impression using the Spellbinders Platinum machine. So I taped a couple of pieces of cardstock together. I'll hang on to the shim with the embossing folders and use them again. This is why I recommend that you play around with your machine to figure out which sandwich is going to work best for you. So here you can see I ran that through the machine. We have this really fun wavelengths pattern on our cardstock now. Sometimes when you run cardstock through these embossing folders, you're going to notice you might get some cracking or even a little bit of tearing when you run it through, depending on how heavy the cardstock is. That was not heavy cardstock, so I had no issues with it. What I recommend is that you lightly spritz your paper with either water or alcohol before running it through your machine in the embossing folder, and that helps to eliminate the cracking, and it also helps to eliminate any tearing that might occur. Another thing that happens when you do that is that you get a deeper embossed design. So I'm going to go ahead and show you. I spritz mine with alcohol because it dries so much quicker. And on the left is the one I spritzed. You can tell that it's still wet in some spots. And then on the right is the first piece I ran through. And to me, the one on the left has much deeper, sharper design on it than the one on the right. Now, they both look amazing, but I just prefer to spritz mine. It gives it that really nice, deep, sharp design. And it does help to eliminate that tearing or cracking that you get when you use a heavier weight cardstock. Let's go ahead and run the thatched design through the machine as well so you can have a quick look at it. And then we're going to get into some really fun techniques with these embossing folders. I am a huge fan of embossing folders. I love to play around with them and try different things with them, different mediums with them. There's a lot of fun things you can do. So there's that gorgeous thatched design from the second embossing folder. The first technique I'm going to share with you just has us ink swiping across the raised design. So this is that first piece of paper I ran through the embossing folder in the machine. And I'm just using a blue color that's close to the color of the cardstock I used. And I'm just going to lightly lay my ink pad on the raised areas of the design and just swipe back and forth to color those areas. So here you can see this is the blue color, and like I said, it's pretty close to the color of the cardstock. So I'm actually going to switch over to a black ink so that you can really see the difference when you do this. Now the black just causes that design to pop right up off of that blue cardstock, and I think it's so neat when you do this. Now another way that you can do this is if you have a white cardstock like what we have with the thatched paper. So you can bring in a blender brush or even the rechargeable airbrush that I've shared with so many of you lately. And you can do a light color ink and just go ahead and color the whole piece of paper with your light shade. Then we'll come in with a darker shade of ink and do that swiping technique over those raised areas. So I'm going to come in with a light sand color ink here with my blender brush and just lay down a little bit of this ink over the design, and then I'm going to come in with a dark espresso truffle ink and swipe over those raised areas. So one thing you always want to keep in mind when you're doing the swiping technique is you want to be very light-handed with it. You don't want to apply any pressure. So I just lay the ink pad down and then glide it across the top of those raised areas. If you apply pressure, it's going to push the raised areas down, and then it's just going to ink up the whole piece of paper. Another thing that I love to do with the embossing folders is apply ink directly to the embossing folder. So I'm going to take this pink ink I have here, and we're going to apply it right over that folder. I'm just laying the ink pad down, swiping it back and forth to apply the ink. And you can do multiple colors with this. It's so much fun playing around with it. So I'm using Rosebud and Tangelo inks here. I'm just tapping it on now. So usually what happens when you're swiping that ink pad across your embossing folder, it's going to leave straight lines from where you swipe. If you don't want to see those straight lines in your embossed design, then just after you've laid down majority of the ink, take your ink pad and tap it over the embossing folder, and that'll get rid of those lines. Sometimes I really like those lines in the design, so I'll leave them, and then other times I'll tap the ink pad across the embossing folder to get rid of them. Here I went ahead, I spritzed the paper with alcohol. We're going to run it through, and then I'll pull it out and let you guys check this out. I think I mentioned that I used Tangelo ink, but I actually think that is Dandelion ink. Sorry about that. Normally what I'll do when I'm doing this technique is I will crank the folder back and forth through the machine 2 or 3 times. Another thing that you can do is you can tape your cardstock down to one side of your embossing folder and then go ahead and ink up the other side, then run it through. And then if you want to go darker, your paper is exactly where you need it to be. You can ink your folder up again, close the folder up, and then run it back through the machine, and you don't have to worry about exact placement because you taped it in place before you started. I wanted you to see how easy these clean up. I just spritzed a little bit of alcohol on mine and wiped them down. Once I finished using them for the day, I take them to the kitchen sink and I wash them with lukewarm water and a little bit of Dawn dishwashing liquid. So that helps to remove any of the residue left behind from the alcohol that I've just wiped the ink off with, and I don't have to worry about it. Now here you can take another ink pad and completely go over what you just did because you have that ink in the negative areas, and so we're inking up the raised areas again like we did in the first technique where we're just swiping that ink pad across. So you can get some really fun designs out of the embossing folders just playing around with different mediums with them. So here I'm going to show you how you can use your alcohol inks with your embossing folders. What I've done is I've taken a little spritzer bottle, I put some alcohol in it, and I added some mermaid ink in one of the spritzer bottles, and then the other one I added some citrus alcohol ink. Those are both Tim Holtz brands. And I just shake them up once I add them to the bottle, and then I spritz that over the embossing folder, and I've laid down a piece of glossy paper. Now, glossy paper is amazing with alcohol inks. It reacts different, obviously, than Yupo paper does because Yupo paper allows you to move the ink around. Gloss paper absorbs the ink, and once it's absorbed, that's it. It's not going anywhere, but you can still get some amazing backgrounds using alcohol inks and glossy paper. So here what I did was I went ahead and I spritzed the inside of the embossing folder with the citrus and mermaid alcohol inks that were diluted, and then it ran that through the embossing machine with the glossy paper, and you saw how you got that really soft look. Now, if you wanted to go a little bit heavier or have a more intense look to your embossed piece, then you can just apply the alcohol ink directly to your ink blender, run that across your embossing folder, put your paper in, and again, I used glossy paper for this, and then ran it through the machine. Now, if I even came in and spritzed more of the color over the top of it just to take it up another notch, But this is a really fun way to play around and create some different, some very unique backgrounds. So here, how many of you have purchased Distress Oxide sprays? I think we all probably have a few of those in our craft room somewhere. Here's a great way to use them. You can take your Distress Oxide sprays and spray the inside of your embossing folder. Take Bristol Smooth paper, lay it down, and we're going to close the embossing folder down onto the back of the Bristol Smooth, and we're going to use a brayer. So we're not going to run this through our die cut machine at all. We're just going to use a brayer and run over this. And the reason that I close the embossing folder, it helps to contain the mess. So I'm not getting a bunch of ink on my brayer and then getting it all over everything. But here you can see we got this really fun design with that pink and kind of orange ombre look. I love this technique. I've done cards like this before, and they're great to use with die cuts or even your large alphabet dies and stuff like that. So once you do your first panel, you're going to notice that there's less ink laid down. What I like to do is come in with my sheer shimmer spray, revive that ink that's still there on the folder, and then go in and brayer over it again. And it's going to be a little bit of a lighter color, but it's going to have that gorgeous shimmer with it this time around. And it's, like I said, these are just great ways for you to really get a lot of use out of your embossing folders. I don't want you guys to look at the embossing folders and just think, oh, I'm going to emboss white paper with it, because there's so much more you can do. So here is the one where I added that gorgeous shimmer spray. Now I do want to show you this with the thatched embossing folder as well. So I have that thatched embossing folder laid out, and I'm going to be using Twisted Citron and peeled paint, and I'm going to layer these one on top of the other. I'm lightly spraying down that Twisted Citron Distress Oxide spray, and then I'm going to come over that with the peeled paint spray. We'll go ahead and lay a piece of paper down and run the brayer over it. So a couple of things while I'm doing this I want to talk about real quick are, you can use these for your regular cards. I have a sample I'm going to share with you at the end that I used this paper I'm actually making right now on an A2 card. You don't have to use these just for slimline cards. You can use them on your scrapbook layouts. You can use them on your A2 cards. Just think outside of the box with it and have fun. That's the biggest thing, is to have fun. So here you can see how that is such a gorgeous look. Would that not be pretty for like a Hawaiian themed card with that yellow and green in it and that thatched look? I absolutely love it. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I thought we would try the Distress Oxide spray with some glossy photo paper. And I was pleasantly surprised at the result that I got when I did the glossy paper. So let's have a quick look at that. I went ahead and I reapplied the Twisted Citron Oxide spray and the peeled paint, and then laid the glossy paper into the embossing folder, closed it, and then brayed over it several times just to make sure I was getting it covered. This does give you more of a distressed look, but I still love the way that it turned out. I think that the Distress Oxide sprays are so much fun with glossy paper. Now, here are some backgrounds that we've made while we were talking about these new embossing folders. There's just a lot of fun. I do have a couple of more ways that I want to share with you real quick. I think you're going to be surprised at one of them. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. For the next technique, we're going to be using Stazon Ink. Now, I don't want you to worry, Stazon Ink comes off. I just clean it off with alcohol like I did the rest of the inks. And then after I'm completely done using the embossing folders, I go ahead and take them to the kitchen sink like I mentioned earlier. So with Stazon Ink, it's perfect for plastic. So we're actually going to use our embossing folder and the Stazon Ink to create a fun design on some clear plastic to use for a shaker card. So here I'm laying down an orange color, a yellow, a green, and then I'm also going to come in with a teal color to finish that off. we'll bring in a piece of the graphics crystal clear plastic. I absolutely love this plastic. It's so crystal clear and it's so pretty. And we'll go ahead, lay it down, and then close the embossing folder up and use our brayer on it. Now you're going to notice something with this when you're doing it. You're not going to get solid lines like you do with the Distress Oxides or even like you get with the dye inks. This is just picking up the outline of the design, but it is still such a neat look. And I can't wait to show you the card that I made with it, but I'm going to show you real quick right now how this comes out because I think it is absolutely amazing. Here you can see it doesn't pick up the solid lines. It's more of like outlined areas. And I'm going to pick this up so you can have a close-up of it. And you have to let this dry for a little bit because it's ink on plastic, and Stazon is meant for plastic. So it dries pretty quick, but I still recommend that you just set it to the side, let it be for a while, and let it completely dry before you try to run it through your die cut machine. I want to show you real quick how easy the Stazon comes off of your embossing folders if anyone's curious. Again, I'm just spraying some alcohol directly onto the embossing folder. I'm going to grab a rag and just wipe it right off, and you can see it comes off. I do want to say, if you let it sit there for a long time, you might have to struggle a little bit to get it off. But if you go ahead and clean it off immediately, you won't have any issues with it. So here are the samples that I created using the backgrounds. Now this is the Distress Oxide sprays. We sprayed the embossing folder, used our brayer to pick that color up. Again, another one that I used, only this time I die cut that with the Slimline Waves die and then pop those pieces up off the front of a card. Here we have the graphics crystal clear plastic that we use the Stazon ink on, and again we just used our brayer on the back side of that embossing folder to transfer the ink. This next card coming up is one of my favorites. It's using the new Floral Impression 6x6 paper pack. You need to check out that paper pack. It is absolutely stunning, and I use the thatched embossing folder with it in several different ways. Here we have the thatched embossing folder we ran through with the Slimline Wobble window die already done, and then after I embossed it, I ran a black ink pad over it. And of course we have those adorable little gnome friends that are just released today as well. So that's going to bring us to the end of the video. Let me know what you think about the embossing folders. We are so excited about these. I can't wait to hear what you think about them. And if you need more information on the products I used, everything is linked in the description box below. You can head over to the Whimsy Stamps website. Please know how much I appreciate you spending time with me today. And until next time, take care.